Welcome to Coffee Cup Stories with Jack. Next in the lineup, Sigmatech. Again, in the 90s, I was a junior engineer, had moved from Quantum to Sigmatech. In my tenure there at Sigmatech, I worked on two things primarily. The first was a very early version of the National Missile Defense Program. And the second was MLRS, the Multiple Launch Rocket System. But I'll cover the Multiple Launch Rocket System in some detail in the course of a few other coffee cups. So I want to talk about this thing that was happening there in the 90s. This is early 90s. Ronald Reagan in the 80s had created this Star Wars program. We were going to defend the United States from a massive Soviet attack with ICBMs against the United States. There were going to be satellites flying everywhere with lasers, and we're going to be satellites flying around that could smash into them and shoot them down with lasers. And there were going to be interceptors, and it was gigantic, and we were going to intercept thousands of Soviet ICBMs. An ICBM, by the way, is an intercontinental ballistic missile, something that you can shoot from one side of the globe over to the other side. Well, Star Wars was completely unworkable at the time. Too big, too complex, and the technology wasn't anywhere near ready, which doesn't distress people in the engineering world. If you'll give us money in a couple of decades, we can make the technology ready, or at least that was kind of the thought. But then the Soviet Union collapsed, and along with the Soviet Union, most of that ICBM threat just disappeared. So with no big threat from Russia anymore, Star Wars just kind of didn't need to be around. We didn't need to be spending trillions and gazillions and bazillions of dollars on it. But the question came up. There are now Russian rocket scientists just kind of floating free in the world, Russian nuclear scientists floating free in the world, and there might be some plutonium floating free in the world because the Soviet Union's breakup was not clean or pretty. And all those aforementioned scientists were out of a job and broke. Nobody was paying them, and rogue states might just well pay to get hold of ICBM technology and nuclear technology. And so Russia wouldn't always be the source of these threats, and the United States might not always be the target of the threats. You can imagine a scenario where someone in, I don't know, southern Africa wants to shoot an ICBM at, I don't know, somebody in India or Pakistan or something. You can certainly imagine a scenario where China wants to shoot one at England, say, but nobody other than the Russians and the Americans had really big ICBM fleets, and the Russians were decommissioning theirs as fast as they could. And since the technology for this gigantic system wasn't ready yet, and it was just completely unworkable and totally unaffordable to do the big one, perhaps what we should do, went the thought, we should prepare a defense against these, what we called rogue states. Because if one rogue state, oh, say, I don't know, Iran or Iraq or somebody like that, got hold of just one, two, three, four missiles, they could hold everybody hostage. And if somebody actually launched, accidentally or otherwise, it would just be really, really bad if Washington or Toronto or London or Berlin were to evaporate in a mushroom cloud. So we thought it would be a good idea to create a defense that could fix that. So we could defend against one, two, three, four of these things. That's probably a good idea. So yeah, let's go do that. Also, the technology to do that might actually be feasible, and we can afford perhaps to create a defense for that. So they created Global Protection Against Limited Strikes, the GPALS project office, in, about 1991, I think, which is when I was working this. Well, it didn't work. Everything that they wanted to do was just implausible. It was expensive, and the threat was a long way away, and it just needed more technology development. So it eventually kind of went into the technology development bucket that eventually became the National Missile Defense Program, which got renamed to the Ground-Based Mid-Course Defense Segment, which is classic government speak. Anyway, so I worked on GPALs, and then I worked on GMD, said ground-based mid-course thing. And I did that when it was called National Missile Defense and when it was called ground-based. And it took about 10, 15 years, but it turns out we got it to work. Now, it has its problems, but who doesn't? If anybody cared, I could explain why it has problems and how to fix those problems, but I doubt very much that anybody cares. This was an important job for me because this was my first real taste of missile defense. I'd done just a little bit of missile defense work at Quantum as a very junior engineer. But for the first time, I was face to face with one problem and one solution, and how do you try to get that solution to answer that problem? It's a real program now, and you can't just make view graphs and imagine things. You have to actually make plans as to how this thing is going to work. And had a good time. Enjoyed that portion of it. I didn't really understand it. It turns out I didn't understand it because I didn't understand how it was going to actually work, because it wouldn't actually work. So, maybe not as dumb as I thought. We'll cover the rest of the Sigmatech experience in some other ones. Blessings.